So the last thing that we're going to talk about today is how to factor trinomials when the number that's in front of the x squared is not equal to 1, okay? So these problems, remember, you were factoring quadratics, so they're going to look like kind of like in that form. But we're talking about what to do when a is some number other than 1. So a in these problems is a number other than 1. Okay, so if you look at the examples, you'll see that in these examples you have a number in front of the x squared that's not 1. Okay, so a lot of the stuff that we did in the other video will apply here, but when you get to that very last step about kind of the reasoning part of it, that part will change a bit. Okay, so we're going to just kind of go through these examples and talk about what is different in these problems rather than the ones that you did in the last video. Okay, so remember, you still will check for a GCF, so do not forget this, because when you least expect it, the problem will have a GCF, and then you'll get it wrong because you forgot to factor out the greatest common factor, or GCF, okay? So don't forget to do that. Then, like I said, a lot of the steps that you did with the trial and error in that last video will still apply here, so that you'll still be doing the majority of the first steps, okay? But when you get to that last step, you're going to have to actually consider the multiples, or what multiplies to give you the first number, but also the last number. So you're going to have to take into consideration both of those. And so to do that, you're going to start by listing out what multiplies to give you the first and the last terms. And then you have to do what I call chin and grin, which is kind of just a special way to remember, kind of helping you reason through it. Okay, so the best way that I can explain this is with examples, so we're going to go ahead and do some examples. All right, so the first thing is, just like you did in the last problems, you're going to start by looking to see what do they have in common. Do they have a GCF? Well, do they have a variable in common? Nope, not all three of them have a variable. Then you look at the numbers. Do they have a number in common? And there's not a number other than 1 that will go into all of them. So you can kind of skip the GCF part for this one. Then you're going to do a lot of the same steps as we did before. So it's a trinomial. This one has a number other than 1 up front, but you still will start. Sorry, my lid's breaking today. You're still going to start by putting your parentheses. So we're going to put our parentheses, okay? And then you're still going to kind of think through the multiples. If you want to go ahead and list the multiples to begin with, you can do that. If you would rather do that at the end, you can do that at the end, okay? That's kind of up to your preference. If you'd rather do it at the end, you're going to still look at the signs. So like in the last video, the signs will work the same. So you start by looking at the last sign. And so if it's a negative, remember, that automatically means that my signs are going to be different. So in this one, we already know that one sign in this parentheses, or one or the other, is going to be a plus, and then the other one's going to be a minus, okay? Now, with the last problems, we were able to go ahead and put our signs in the parentheses. But you're going to find with these problems, if the signs are different, you have to wait before you put them in there, because as to where you put them is going to depend on your numbers, okay? So you already know the signs, so now let's go ahead and go to that last part. The last part is where you, in these problems, are going to list the multiples of the first and the last terms. So look at that number up front. What multiplies to give you that? Well, that one's kind of an easy one. There's only one thing that'll multiply, just 3 and 1. So now we list out what multiplies to give you the last term. So what multiplies to give me 4? Well, we got a 4 and a 1. And then also 2 times 2 will give it to me, okay? Now, when you start the reasoning part, you're going to start with this term and choose one of these multiples that give you this. Now, there's only one, so this one's an easier one. So we know that if we take 3 times 1, That's going to give me 3. So, and there's no other way to do that. So that one's good. But then also remember, what times what gives you x squared? Well, that would be x and x. So technically 3x times 1x would give you the first term. Okay. So there's that part. And then you're going to look at these. This is where the trial and error happens, okay? You kind of have to sit here and just pick one and then hope it works. And if it works, yay. If it doesn't, then you have to try it again, okay? So let's say that we try 4 and 1. So what you're going to do is you're going to plug in a 4 and you're going to plug in a 1 and you're going to see if it works. Well, how do you see if it works? That's where the chin and grin comes in, okay? So what does chin and grin mean? Well, that means, so here's your chin, and maybe you'll see it. Here is your grin, okay? Chin and grin. Some people tell me it kind of looks like a monkey. But what you're doing here is these, do you see how it connects the 4 and the 1x, and then the 3x connects to the 1? That's telling you you're going to multiply those numbers, so 4 times 1x is 4x. 3x times 1 is 3x. And then you're going to look at it, and you're going to remember that it has different signs, and you're going to ask yourself that same question you asked in the last one. Excuse me. After we've multiplied them, after we did the chin and grin, do these combine in some way with those signs? So one of them is going to be a plus and one's going to be a minus, to give you this middle term. And so our goal is to get a -1 out of it. Well, is there a way I can combine these to get -1? Well, if they have different signs, if I put a negative with the 4 and then a positive with the 3x, -4 plus 3 gives me -1. So that means that I actually guessed correctly with the first thing that I plugged in. Because these will combine to give me -1. If that didn't work, then I would erase the 4 and the 1, and then I would plug in the 2 and the 2, and then I would do the same thing I did, do the chin and grin, and then see if that works, okay? But because this worked to begin with, I know that all of these numbers are correct. Now I have to figure out my signs. Well, notice the negative has to be with the 4. So look at what you multiplied, and it's going to go in front of this number. So that negative has to go here. And then that positive, notice we took the 3x times the 1. So notice that 1 would have to be the positive. Okay, and then there's your answer. And then remember, you could check it, so you can go to the side and multiply it out and see if you get this middle term. So I would take kind of, I guess, small to the side. 3x times x gives me 3x squared, which is good because that's what I want to begin with. Then I take the 3x times the 1, which is positive 3x. Notice you're going to kind of end up with your chin and grin part here. And then I take -4 times x, -4x, voila. And then -4 times 1 gives me -4, which notice is your last term here. And then these will combine, and they should, kind of like what you did here, to give you that middle one. So you get 3x squared. The 3x minus 4x gives you -x, and then -4. And notice you get the same things when you started. So you know that's correct, okay? So let's do a couple more so you can see how this works, and then you get to practice without me, okay? So it's a trinomial. Check for a GCF. Do they have anything in common? And they don't. So after you look for the GCF, if it has a number other than 1, you're going to have to do the trial and error and do the chin and grin to check that middle part, okay? So draw your 2 parentheses. Then go ahead and figure out your signs. So in this one, that tells me that the signs are going to be different. So we're going to have a plus and a minus again. So remember, you can't put those in until the end. Then you list out what multiplies to give you the first and the last term. So what times what gives me 4? This one has 2 things. You got 4 and 1, and you got 2 and 2. This one, well, what multiplies to give me 5? That one's only got 1. So if you have list multiples, it's easier, okay? But this one has a couple things that we might have to try, so we'll just have to see how that goes, okay? And so you pick one to begin with. So You can go off of a hunch. You can kind of think through it first to see which one might be the one that works. But let's say that we decide that we think 2 and 2 will work. So then what you're going to do is you're going to take the 2 and the 2 and plug it in. And then what times what gives me x squared? It'd be x and x. And then after you plug in here, you're going to look at what multiplies to give you the last term, and you're going to pick one of those. Well, this one's an easier one because there's only one that we could try. So it's either going to be that the 5 goes here and the 1 goes there, or for these problems, I do suggest writing it backwards because you're going to have to try it this way too. Okay? Now, because the 2 and the 2 are the same, you'll notice this one won't make a difference, but let's start with the 5 and 1 and see if that works, okay? So to check it, you do the chin and grin. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my chin and my grin. And then you multiply them. So 5 times 2 is 10x. And then 2x times 1 gives me 2x. And then I'm going to think, when I combine these, we have to get a negative, and that's technically a -1 out of it, okay? And then remember, they have to have different signs. So is there a way I can combine these with different signs that would give me -1? And notice there is not a way to do that. So that means that the 5 and the 1 didn't work. So then you would try the 1 and the 5. You would switch it, you would try the other one. And now this is the reason why I said this one won't really matter, is because notice when we multiply these, you get 1 times 2x, which is 2x. 2x times 5x, which is 10x, which is the same situation. And so we know that both of those don't work. So does that mean it's prime? No, because remember there was something else over here that we didn't try. So if none of these work when you did the 2 and the 2, that just simply means the 2 and the 2 doesn't work. Okay, so now we got to try the 4 and the 1. So this is the trial and error part. So you will have to have an eraser because, you know, if some things aren't working, you've got to try something else. So that means we have to go back to square one, and we've got to try the 4 and the 1. Okay, so 4 and 1, and then x times x, so it'd be 4x and 1x. And then we try this one and this one. Okay, so we're going to start with the 5 and the 1. And then we do the chin and grin. So 5 times 1x, 5x. 4x times 1 gives me 4x. And then I'm going to think through it. They have to have different signs. Do these combine with different signs to give me -1? And yes, they will, but you got to be strategic. Which one's going to have the positive and which's going to have the negative? I'd have to put the negative with the 5 and the positive with the 4, because when I combine these, that's the only way it's going to give me -1. So I know these numbers are correct. Now we have to look at the signs. So look at what you multiplied. So this one, the negative would have to go here, and then that positive would go here. And so this is the factored form of that. Okay, and again, you can multiply it out to check it, so don't forget about that. Okay, so what about the next one? Check for a GCF. Do they have anything in common? They don't have a number in common, and they don't have any variables in common, so they don't have a GCF. It has 3 terms, and there's a number other than 1 up front. So that means we have to do it this way. Okay, so start by putting your 2 parentheses. Go ahead and figure out your sign. So that's a plus sign. That means they're going to be the same. And then remember, you look at that middle sign to know what they're both going to be. So they're both going to be a minus. And so if they're the same, you could actually go ahead and put them in if you wanted to. Okay, because they're going to be the same. So that's not going to make a difference. And then you list out what multiplies to give you the first term, and then what multiplies to give you the last term. So go to the side. What times what gives me 3? It'd be 3 times 1. There's nothing else. And then you ask yourself what times what gives you the last one. And remember, with these problems, I do recommend writing out the multiples kind of frontwards and backwards. It'll just help when you're checking it. So we got 8 times 1, and then I'm going to rewrite it as 1 times 8 because you'll have to check both of those. We also have 4 times 2 and 2 times 4, so we have more multiples here. So we're going to have to maybe try a little bit more. And then that's it, okay? So because this is the only thing that multiplies to give that, I know it's going to be 3x and 1x here. So that's not going to throw me off this time. But now I have to figure out which of these, when I plug them in here, will work to give me my negative 10. And then remember, here the signs are the same, okay? So let's check it out. And you just have to take a guess to begin with. So you want to hope that you guess correctly. If not, you just have to erase more. Okay, so let's try the 8 and the 1. So you plug the 8 and the 1 in. Then you do the chin and grin. So you can ignore the signs if you want to, or because you already know they're going to be both negative, you could put the signs with them. But 8 times 1x is 8x, and you know that it's going to both be negative, so you can go ahead and put the negative. 3x times negative 1 would be negative 3x. Do these combine to give you negative 10? Well, negative 8 minus 3 is negative 11, so that doesn't work. So that means the 8 and the 1 did not work. Okay, so that means I have to erase, and then I have to go back to my drawing board. Okay, well, let's try another one. Let's try maybe the 4 and the 2. So let's plug in the 4 and the 2. Then you do the chin and grin. So 4 times 1x gives me 4x, and I know it has to be negative. And then the 3x times the 2, so that gives me 6x, and then I also know that has to be negative. And let's check it. With these signs, do these combine to give me negative 10? Negative 4 minus 6 is negative 10. So yay! That means that this one worked, and so that means that that is the factored form of that. And again, you can multiply it out, so don't forget about that. Okay? So, last one. All right? So, it's a trinomial. Check for a GCF. Do they have anything in common? And this one does. So, like I said, when you least expect it, make sure you look for it. And so, they do have a number that would go into all three. And then if they had a variable in common, then you would include that. But they don't all have a variable, so I know they won't have a variable in common, okay? So then what's the biggest number that goes into all of these? So it might take you some time to figure it out, but the biggest number that would go into all three of those would be 3. And so before I can do anything like I've been doing, I have to factor out that GCF. So to factor it out, remember, you write it outside of parentheses, and then you take each one of those terms and you divide by that. So 18 over 3 ends up being 6x squared. And then the 33x over 3 gives me plus 11x. And then negative 30 over 3 ends up being negative 10. Okay, so after you factor out the GCF, then you can look at what's in the parentheses and see if you can do anything with that. Okay, so that 3, whenever I'm factoring the rest of this, is just going to come down. Okay, and then I'm going to write down the factored part of that version, or of that part. Okay, so same thing as before. Look at what's in the parentheses, and we're going to go through the steps. So we've already factored out the GCF. Go ahead and look at your signs. So that is a negative, so that tells me that my signs are going to be different. And then I have to list out what multiplies to give me 6, and then what multiplies to give me 10. So I'm going to go over here. So I got 6 times 1 and 3 times 2 for that one. So that's what multiplies to give me my 6 right there. And then over here, I'm going to go and write down what multiplies to give me 10. So I got 10 and 1. And remember, write it in reverse for these problems. And then I got 5 and 2, and 2 and 5. And then that's it. Okay, so this one's got a little bit more to check. So we're going to hope that we can take a good guess. If not, then we just got to do more work. Okay, so with this one, let's try... let's try the 3 and 2 first. I have a better feeling about those for some reason. So we're going to have 3x and 2x to get the 6x squared. All right, so we're going to hope that that one works, okay? If not, we're going to have to start all over, okay? Then we take a guess here, all right? Well, which one of these do I think works, okay? I'm going to actually give you a little hint here. When you plug one in, so like notice if I plug in, for instance, the 5 and the 2, if they have a GCF, like, or something in common within the parentheses, and your original problem does not have a GCF, like notice we already factored out the GCF here. So if they have something in common, that automatically means that that one won't work, okay? So we already know that the 5 and 2 won't work. And then for the same reason, notice if you plug in the 1 and the 10, the 1 and the 10, the 2 and the 10 would also have something in common. So I know that that one also won't work, okay? So that will eliminate some of your answer choices right away, okay? So now these two we still have to check. So let's check the 2 and the 5. So I'll plug in the 2 and the 5, and then you do the chin and the grin. So go ahead and do that. So we got 2 times 2x, which is 4x. And then I have 3x times 5, which is 15x, okay? And then look at your signs. We had different signs. So that means one of these has to be a positive and one has to be a negative. And then you're going to ask yourself, do either of those combine to give me a positive 11? Well, if I put the positive with the 15 and the negative with the 4, 15 minus 4 is 11. So that works. Oh, hallelujah. So I don't have to go back and try. If it didn't work, then I'd have to try the other one. And if that didn't work, then that means I have to go back to the beginning and try the 6 and the 1, okay? But it does work, so yay. So now we just got to figure out our signs. So this one was from the 2 and the 2x, so that's going to go in this blank right here. And then that positive was from the 5 and the 3x, so that positive is going to go here. And then remember that 3 just hangs out in front, so all of this together would be the factored form of that. Okay, and then don't forget, you can multiply it out. So